All right, so welcome everyone to our emergency briefing on offshore wind. We are here tonight as the Maryland Sierra Club chapter. We also have someone from the National Sierra Club to talk about the situation, what is happening, and we're going to talk about what we can do to protect clean energy in our state. We want to have this conversation to give you all the background that you need to feel comfortable talking about what is happening, to know the full context, and again, to be able to take action to protect clean energy and offshore wind in Maryland for all of the reasons that it matters to us. I see a lot of people in the chat talking about why you came in and why offshore wind is important to you. So yeah, thank you all for being here. If you don't know me, I am Zoe. I'm the field organizer with the Maryland Sierra Club. And tonight, we will first be going through our presentation. We have a few speakers with us tonight, and then we will leave the last 15 minutes or so to answer your questions. So if you have questions throughout as people are talking, you can put them in the chat or hold on to them for the end for our Q&A and open discussion. But until then, we ask that you remain muted and introduce yourself in the chat if you have not already. So our agenda for tonight, we're going to go through the basics of what is offshore wind, what is the background on offshore wind in Maryland, how did we get to where we are now, what is the current status. We're going to talk about the Trump administration's ongoing attacks on clean energy and learn some lessons from what's been happening in other states, what kind of organizing has worked. And then we're going to talk about what we can do as the Maryland Sierra Club and moving forward. And then we'll have our Q&A and open discussion. And first, I am going to pass it off to Josh Tolkien.
Hello, and thanks, everybody. I'm Josh Tolkien. I'm the director of the Maryland chapter of the Sierra Club. And I am also now a 15-year advocate and supporter of the development of offshore wind in Maryland. In my section, I'm going to tell you a little bit about offshore wind, the history of Sierra Club's advocacy for offshore wind, as well as the work we've done to ensure that offshore wind is environmentally sound, and tell you a little bit about the specific project that is proposed here in Maryland. But first, I'm going to switch from my camera, which I did not realize is giving you a very bizarre side view of me, and switch to one that's a little bit more head-on. So, hello. So how offshore wind helps Maryland and how you can help offshore wind. Next slide, please. Let's start off with the basics. What is offshore wind? Offshore wind is a way to produce electricity. When we turn on the light switches in our homes, our electricity comes through our distribution wires, which comes from our transmission wires, which comes from large or sometimes small sources of electricity, nuclear, gas, coal. Most sources of electricity operate by spinning a turbine, which creates and interacts with an electromagnetic field and creates electricity, which we then convert. If you're interested in diving more into that, Bill Nye, the science guy, has some great videos on it, but I'm going to assume that's the right level of detail. Offshore wind are wind turbines located significantly offshore, usually in the ocean. In the case of Maryland, about 20 miles offshore, where there is significant and consistent wind. The wind blows and spins the turbines. That generates electricity. I used to think that was it. That generates electricity, and then I use the electricity. In fact, there's a lot of steps in between. First, the turbines connect to a substation. A substation is basically a place where we convert the voltage of electricity. This is not really important, except that the voltage that we use in our homes is pretty inefficient, meaning that you lose a decent amount through heat. So first, they're going to convert it to a high voltage type of electricity, 240, 240 volts, and then they will transmit that for the 20 miles inshore, where it will reach another substation and enter our transmission system. And then eventually that will reach a substation in our community where it's converted to the normal usage that we all have, which is 110 or 120 volts, and make it into our homes. This is not really any different technology than onshore wind, except for the very, very significant transmission distance. So why do we care? First, offshore wind is just cool. It's a very cool technology. It's able to generate pretty consistent electricity at upwards of 75 to 80% reliability, which actually exceeds that of natural gas nowadays. But the main reason that offshore wind is cool is because of what offshore wind isn't. Offshore wind is not gas, it's not coal, it's not nuclear. And when Maryland first moved to pursue offshore wind, we had 6 old, dirty coal-fired power plants producing around 35% of our energy, putting huge amounts of pollution onto Charles County, Prince George's County, Baltimore City, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, Montgomery County, Frederick, and parts of Western Maryland. So what really makes offshore wind as important is that it's the alternative to the very harmful, very polluting fossil fuel sources of electricity that Maryland has historically relied on. Next slide. So let's get the basic facts. Offshore wind is clean. Offshore wind is popular. It polls very high on a bipartisan level. Offshore wind is safe for marine ecosystems. What we should say is offshore wind can be safe for marine ecosystems, and it generally is. With good oversight and good design, which the project in Maryland have, offshore wind is made to be very safe for marine ecosystems. Anything can be unsafe if done poorly. Offshore wind is typically done with very high oversight. The cost of offshore wind is stable because the costs are the construction. Those are sunk costs. And after the project goes into operation, it can operate at a very stable financial level. Next slide. So let's talk about the background of offshore wind in Maryland. Sierra Club has been involved in the advocacy for offshore wind since 2011, when then Senator Paul Pinsky and Delegate Tom Hucker introduced an offshore wind bill. We have been involved, many of you have been involved, for over 14 years. And I want to just touch on what we've been bringing. First, we've been bringing everything that advocates and activists need to bring. Policy expertise, legal support. We have provided rallies and media and more. We did town halls across the state, lifting up the economic opportunities. We did a lot of work. We've also created accountability. This being a new technology and it being something that a company is supposed to provide, it's not just our job to say, okay, great, somebody wants to do offshore wind, best of luck. We have been watchdogging the potential financial impacts. We have been engaging on all of the environmental impact reports, and even in some cases have settlements and agreements with several of the companies to make sure that these projects uphold a very high standard of environmental protection. Next slide, please. You can skip this one. So I want to go over a brief history of the policy that brought these two, the current offshore wind projects forward. I'm going to tell you a little bit about those projects as we go. In 2013, Maryland passed the Offshore Wind Energy Act. At that point, not only was there not offshore wind in the United States yet, there wasn't even a policy for how federal waters could be leased for offshore wind companies. So when Maryland got started, it wasn't just trying to enact offshore wind, it was trying to send a message up to the federal government that Maryland wanted to pursue clean energy and that it wanted the federal government to figure out all of these processes. So this was a huge statement when Maryland passed this bill. It said that we get 2.5% of our electricity from offshore wind. I believe it was by the year 2025 at the time. Not going to hit that target, but it was very aspirational. It took 4 years to figure out what a competitive bidding process would look like. How do we award the contracts to certain companies? How do we make sure that it's protective of ratepayers and supportive of minority businesses? So after 4 years, 2 companies applied, US Wind and Ørsted, and their proposals were rigorously reviewed and amended and ultimately approved. While they were developing their plans, Maryland got very excited about climate and clean energy and doubled in 2019, it doubled the offshore wind targets. And those same companies came back and proposed modifications to their proposals. And then in 2024, the Power Act increased the overall goal and created a state procurement of 1 gigawatt of wind energy. Unfortunately, one of the 2 projects by Ørsted, a foreign company, they have hit some economic snares that they have not been able to overcome, and they put their projects on pause. What we do have are 2 different projects, both owned by US Wind, which we're basically just calling now the Maryland offshore wind projects, that total about 1.7 gigawatts, which should mean absolutely nothing to most of you, but is enough to power about 750,000 homes. So it's a pretty big source of energy. It's about the size of 3.5 gas-fired power plants. These are the projects that have been heavily invested in by Maryland and which are now at risk. Next slide. Just to emphasize how much work had to be done, at the time that Maryland started this work, the federal government didn't even have a lease program. So Maryland worked with the Department of Interior to create a program for competitive bidding for lease areas. And the companies that had bid to Maryland also needed to win these leases. There's been a review by the Department of Energy and by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission. And most importantly, there's been the overarching environmental review under the National Environmental Policy Act, also known as an Environmental Impact Statement, or EIS, which lives with the main agency, the Department of Interior, but involves review from many, many different agencies. I first weighed in on the environmental analysis simply for the pre-construction phase when they were going to be doing exploration of the ocean floor to be able to even ascertain where these turbines could possibly be located. And Sierra Club weighed in on the timing, the decibel level, and all of the other components that were necessary to protect whales and were protective of ocean life. And that was just for the exploratory pre-construction phase. So this is a good 7 years in the making. In 2024, US Wind received it's called a record of decision, its final environmental review, and its construction and operation permit was approved. So what I want everyone to understand tonight is first that offshore wind offers huge promise for the ability to help Maryland reach its clean energy goals. The program is ambitious, it's highly scrutinized, and that despite what a lot of people think, environmental groups have not just been applauding these projects, but actually have been contributing to the environmental review to make sure that they are upholding standards that it has gone through years and years of permitting, and that it was fully permitted and approved until, drumroll please, you'll hear about the really, really disturbing challenges that we have faced recently. If you have been a decade-long activist with Sierra Club, or if this is your first call, either way, I want you to know that huge amounts of work have gone into getting us to this point. I was hoping that everyone could simply enjoy and benefit from that investment and benefit from the clean energy that should be coming online. But it turns out that we have more work to do. So I am happy to join you all in standing on the shoulders of giants and continuing to push forward this really critical energy source. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Zoe and whoever's speaking next.
Yeah, so we have Christina here from the Lower Eastern Shore. She's the group chair, and I'm going to turn it over to her to speak from her experiences as a leader on the Eastern Shore, and that'll just pass it on over.
Thank you, Zoe. Thank you, Josh. I am Christina Holslander with the Lower Eastern Shore Group, and I'm delighted to see other members of our executive committee also on the screen with Cindy Dillon, Kathy Hardy, Joe Jankowski, Jackie Grinrod, and if anybody else joined since then, I'm definitely glad to see my colleagues here as well. We are the Sierra Club group that represents the 4 counties that are the Lower Eastern Shore, Wicomico, Worcester, Somerset, and Dorchester counties. When we talk about offshore wind, we are referencing the land directly off of Worcester County. And in Maryland, if you've been to the Eastern Shore, if you've been to the coastline, you have been to either Assateague Island National Seashore or Ocean City, Maryland, which is the 10 miles north of Assateague before Delaware. And an interesting thing, with that small pocket of 10 miles of Ocean City, has some pretty strong opinions about this offshore wind project. I'll get into that a little bit more, but right before this Zoom meeting where we're all on the screen together, I put on a load of laundry, I ran my dishwasher, and I, like everybody else here on the screen, am using power on a daily basis that is part of my normal life. And yet that power source, we need it to start coming from more and more sources of clean energy for all of our well-being and for that of the environment. The project that has been worked on for so many years to get offshore wind off of the coast of Maryland is right at the cusp of, being able to go forward with construction. But this 10 miles of land within, well, let me back up to, if you've been to the Eastern Shore, on the other side of the Chesapeake Bay, you have driven through some beautiful areas and you may have seen substations for power transmission, but you have not gone past fossil fuel-based smokestacks that are part of the infrastructure in Baltimore and in Alexandria, Virginia, and in Wilmington, Delaware. We're buffered here on the Eastern Shore from the visuals of what it means to produce power. We don't see that. We have solar fields around here, but as far as a visual of fossil fuel production, we don't have that here. And so an ask with this project to create infrastructure off the coastline of Ocean City, there's a huge reaction of not in my backyard from Ocean City residents and property owners who are expressing they don't want it in their view shed. They're challenging the years of process through getting permitted also means changes in technology. And so what they heard many years ago, it's the designs are a little bit different. So there is a vocal presence of opposition in Ocean City, and it is very prevalent in the visuals. As you drive through town, there are plenty of people that support offshore wind, and throughout the state, but also locally. And we're in the challenge of trying to have the conversations with our sphere of influence around us to gain better understanding and provide better education to other people so that they can wrap their minds around these clean sources of power with offshore wind versus the fossil fuel sources we currently use. So part of the objective tonight is really to fortify expanding our understanding of the Maryland offshore wind project and help us gain confidence and understanding so we can have those conversations more directly, particularly here on the Eastern Shore, where we need to garner more of those people who are uncertain about what this technology means for us, to really understand that it's a much better alternative than fossil fuel sources. Um, of course, the actions of the local municipality having a lawsuit against U.S. Wind kind of aligned with how the federal Trump administration is putting roadblocks in front of us. And to get a better understanding of really those attacks that are happening on the national level, I would like to pass off to Xavier Boatwright from Sierra Club National for a greater understanding in that regard. But I also want to thank the chapter and national for providing this forum for all of us. Thank you.
Thank you, Christina. And yeah, let's talk about some of the Maryland specific attacks. And then I'm also going to talk about some of our organizing in other states in the Northeast. But to begin in Maryland under attack, so let's just call it what it is. It's a slow motion sabotage wrapped in politicization. The Boehm remand of the U.S. Wind's construction and operations plan isn't really about process. It seems more about politics when you look at the overall attacks that we've been seeing. While federal fossil fuel lobbyists, they frame it as prudence, is really procrastination dressed up in bureaucracy and some of the disinformation that Christina just highlighted. Maryland stands to lose things like union paychecks. There's over 6,000 jobs, 750 million in port investments, port contracts, clean power progress. One of the messages, or some of the messages that we've had in other states around other offshore wind related attacks have been around no pause on clean, cheap power, no pause on energy progress. And, we didn't build things like America's first clean port just to see it idled. So from the governor's office to the docks, Maryland has to speak up loudly and keep this project moving. Next slide. So organizing works and lessons from Revolution Wind and Empire Wind. On August 22nd of this year, just about over a month ago, Ørsted's Revolution Wind was 80% built when Trump's team slapped a stop work order on it. Ørsted sued fast and won, and the reasons why is because they showed the court hard numbers. We actually spoke to Ørsted about a week ago and talked to them about the federal court ruling and some of their experiences there. And they said, indeed, they felt like the judge came in with some bias, but when they showed them the facts, it was irrefutable. So some of the facts that they shared were facts around union job loss, contracts that have been breached, and like the dollar amount of that, and then the grid reliability that's threatened. The overall impact and capacity and the amount of homes, buildings that the project would have supported. Also in New York, prior to that, we had the Empire Wind, which was more of a grassroots pushback, but the Empire Wind grassroots coalition turned chaos into coordination. That was the first stop work order. It was April 16th of this year. We kind of heard some rumors, but we didn't really know what was going to happen. And so labor, climate advocates, chambers of commerce, all came out with one message, one rhythm, and that's how they were able to flip that narrative of controversy to a comeback. The takeaway for us here was just that in these cases, speed beats spin and facts beat fear. If you can prove harm and show a united front, you can win, even in a political storm such as the ones that we're seeing now. I'll talk a little bit more in depth about the Empire win, our first attack this year, first start work order, on the next slide. So just a quick timeline, because New York was kind of ground zero. The Trump administration wanted to pick on New York first in its attacks on offshore wind. There was a 24-hour turnaround. We got the stop work order on April 16th, and in 24 hours, Rep. Dan Goldman from New York District 10 called a press conference, and Sierra Club's Ali Samuel led on a message around offshore wind equaling clean air, good jobs, and really went into much more of the details and local New York-based power, but more of the numbers details of like how many jobs, what were those clean air impacts to communities like Brooklyn's Asthma Alley, as well as the need for local power. They don't have much space in New York to build new power plants, so there is a need for local power there in New York, and the offshore wind projects help satisfy some of those needs that are New York specific. And then I'll also say on, when Trump froze Empire One, we had less than a day to respond. Folks got together and got a lot of good airtime. Our message was simple. And then I'll say by Earth Day, they had built such a momentum that our New York team and over 100 people on Long Island joined forces with unions, business leaders, environmentalists, as well as others, all chanting for wind. We brought receipts, Aurora Energy Report. They did an energy report with the New York Offshore Wind, a coalition and alliance, to show how the project, the Empire Wind Project, could meet its grid demands and help meet New York's grid demands. And then they also had another action with lobby meetings that was picked up by the New York Times. And I'll share a document with some of these articles as well as the social media work that folks have done. But, shortly after that, the Trump administration lifted the stop work order. And so the moral of the story, and that was on May 19th. So about a month of hard organizing and advocacy. And on May 19th, Trump lifted the stop work order. And so the moral of the story is just that you can't stop the wind, especially when it's powered by fast organizing, sharp facts, and a bullhorn that doesn't quit. And then a next slide to talk about some of the legal action and grassroots pressure. So now comes the work. It's a two-front work, as what we've seen in some of the other states. But again, you all can be the experts of your own terrain in Maryland. But it was both courtroom and community in the other fights. First, legal folks reached out to attorney generals and partners who filed quickly. Some of it was attorney generals and developers like Orsted and Equinor to argue irreparable harm. That was something that really resonated in the courts in the other states. Irreparable harm to workers specifically, irreparable harm to the grid and grid reliability, and then irreparable harm to the local economy and coastal economy. That's how Empire and Revolution Wind won. They had the hard numbers that the judges just couldn't legally refute. Second was pressure. We had a lot of floor speeches. I've got a slide where I'll show you some pictures, but a lot of floor speeches, letters to elected officials and feds, getting your state elected officials to write letters to the feds, like Boehm, and then also earned media and letters to the editor, social media videos, and even reels from the docks and from the ports that folks can share, short videos. The chambers of commerce, trade unions, as well as mayors, all singing from the same sheet. That they want to build wind and not excuses and delays. And then, to wrap up, I'll just say, if Boehm insists on a remand of the U.S. wind construction and operations permit, then our demand is really quite simple. You know, fix it fast and keep the lights on. This really keeps us in cheap, clean energy, but also is pivotal to the reliability of the grid. Because clean energy delayed is also dirty energy delivered. This is really important, especially considering that right now during the government shutdown, BOEM and BLM, the Bureau of Land Management, um, under that, BOEM has given special exemptions to staff who work on fossil fuel permitting for them to keep working and getting paid while it continues to cease renewable energy permitting at this time during a government shutdown. So true stall tactics for renewable energy right now while fossil fuel permitting continues in a government shutdown. And then next slide, I'll just to wrap up. And then on this slide are just photos from the Revolution and Empire Wind Sierra Club organizing. In the top left corner is Ali Samuel with Representative Dan Goldman from New York District 10 for that press conference. And then the middle picture is the rally and lobby day in Albany, New York, and several other pictures from their lobbying and advocacy efforts.
Thanks so much, Xavier. That was great context and showing us that Maryland is not alone in facing these problems and these attacks from the federal administration right now. Our situation is, of course, unique, but organizing does work. It's worked in other places. It has worked in Maryland to get us to this point, and it is what's going to drive us forward. So I want to share some things that we can do. And actually, I'm going to start with this and then go back a slide. So we heard from Xavier some of the things that have been done to protect offshore wind and clean energy investments on the grassroots side. Of course, there's the legal side as well, but for our purposes, focusing on what we can do, I think we have put together an action toolkit to help lay the foundation for some of that grassroots pressure and advocacy that we can do right now. So we have an action toolkit that we're going to drop a link in the chat. It should be viewable to everyone. If anyone has trouble with access, please let me know. But we've put together a toolkit for you to use to get comfortable talking about offshore wind. As Christina was saying, it's important to us that we're equipping you to go out into your communities, talk with friends, family, community members about what is happening and why it matters. So we have some messaging guidance right at the top where you can see all of these different points that we've touched on about why offshore wind matters in Maryland, why the attacks on offshore wind and clean energy are dangerous for affordability, for our health, for our jobs, and for our future. And then we have some guidance around writing a letter to the editor. So having that public pressure from a grassroots base that supports offshore wind, that is responding to something urgent and unprecedented that is happening. This is an opportunity to make your voice heard in the media. So we have a guide around what writing to a letter to the editor entails. So you can see that in there as well. And then finally, we have contacting your representatives. So right now, specifically, we are looking for champions in our state to be vocal, get loud about what is happening, and to get loud and vocal, especially about the support for offshore wind. That Maryland supports offshore wind and investment in clean energy, and now is not the time to be silent or back down on that. So it is the time to get even louder. So we also have a section on finding out who are your local representatives that you can call on, how we have a sample script for asking them to champion offshore wind right now, to speak out, asking them to speak out. And then we also have ways to stay in contact with those representatives, because this is going to be an ongoing fight and movement that we need to build. So sign up for your representatives' newsletters, see if they're talking about offshore wind, and if they're not, send them some articles, send them some of your thoughts. And you can also follow them on social media. So just ways to stay in contact and build that relationship with your own local representative, because we need to be champions as people on the ground who are impacted by the attacks on clean energy and who want to move away from dangerous fossil fuels. And we also need legislators to be champions in this moment and speak up. So we have that toolkit. Thank you, Leslie, for dropping that in the chat. So you can take a look through that. These are things that you can do right now. And we have resources in here. If you want to write a letter to the editor, we have Leslie's contact info for additional support. And then contacting your representatives, or if you have additional questions after this about what that looks like to reach out, or if you hear a response from a representative, you can email me and I'll drop my email in the chat before we leave the call. So I wanted to share this as some immediate things that we can do. But we also, looking ahead towards the end of this month, we are working as the Maryland Sierra Club to respond, and we are also working with our coalition partners in the Offshore Wind Alliance on a Maryland Day of Action, a Yes to Wind Day of Action. So this is October 30th and 31st. It's a day of action. It's a 24 hours of action, even though it is technically 2 separate days. We have October 30th at 7 p.m. First, we are hosting a Yes to Wind Action Hour, and you can see the flyer here for that. And then October 31st at 11 a.m., we're going to have a Yes to Wind press conference in Baltimore with coalition partners, which it's going to include labor advocates, environmental advocates, and we will have speakers, Senator Chris Van Hollen and Delegate Charkoudian will be in that lineup as well. It's going to be in Baltimore at IBEW's headquarters. And I will drop the link for both of these events in the chat. But this is a moment of mobilization for a lot of people who are invested in offshore wind, again, for jobs, for the environment, for all the many reasons that we need these projects. So October 30th at 7 p.m. will be the next opportunity that's on the calendar right now to get engaged and take some strategic action with people across the state. So register for that and keep an eye out for more details coming soon, and the press conference as well. So I'll drop that information in the chat.